The hardest battles are never fought against enemies. They're fought against the voices that tell you what you cannot be. The summer of 2019 came to Fort Benning like a punishment. Heat rising off the red Georgia clay in shimmering waves, the air thick enough to chew. Private First Class Maya Chen stood at the edge of the sandpit, watching the obstacle course stretch before her, like a gauntlet designed by someone who hated comfort and loved suffering in equal measure. She was 23 years old, 5'4", 118 pounds soaking wet, the smallest soldier in her infantry training platoon by a considerable margin. And she knew exactly what the drill sergeants thought when they looked at her. She'd seen it in their eyes on day one, that flicker of assessment, the mental calculation that said, this one won't make it. She'd grown up seeing that look, in the faces of coaches who thought she was too small for competitive swimming, in the eyes of professors who wondered why a girl from San Francisco's Chinatown wanted to study military history, in the expressions of recruiters who'd suggested gently that perhaps she'd be happier in a support role. Maya had learned long ago that doubt was just fuel with a different name. Chen! The voice cut through the morning humidity like a blade. Front and center, Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb stood at the starting line of the obstacle course, clipboard in hand, stopwatch hanging from his neck like a talisman of judgment. He was 6'2", built like a linebacker, who decided muscles weren't enough and added more muscles on top of them. 14 years in the Army, 3 combat deployments, and a reputation for producing soldiers who either excelled or quit. There was no middle ground in Webb's world. Maya jogged to the starting line and came to attention. Around her, the rest of the platoon was gathering. 47 soldiers in various states of exhaustion, their third week of Infantry 1 Station unit training, having stripped away whatever civilian softness they'd carried through the gates. Webb looked down at her, and she saw it again. That flicker, the assessment, the calculation. Chen, you're running the O course today, full combat load. You know the battalion standard? 12 minutes 30 seconds, drill sergeant. That's the standard for graduation. You know the company record? 9 minutes 42 seconds, drill sergeant. Webb's eyebrow raised slightly, surprised perhaps that she'd done her homework. That's right, 9:42, set by yours truly, back when I was a young private with something to prove. He paused, letting the weight of his accomplishment settle over the assembled soldiers. Nobody's touched that time in 11 years. You think you can beat it? Maya knew the answer he expected. She knew the safe answer, the humble answer, the answer that wouldn't mark her as arrogant or delusional. She knew what a soldier her size was supposed to say when confronted with an impossible standard. Yes, drill sergeant. The silence that followed was profound. She could feel the other soldiers' eyes on her, some surprised, some amused, a few perhaps impressed by her audacity, if not her judgment. Webb's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance, a subtle hardening, like concrete setting. Is that right? It wasn't a question. Well, Private Chen, I appreciate confidence, but confidence without capability is just noise, and right now, you're making a lot of noise. He turned to address the platoon. Listen up. Private Chen here thinks she can beat my course record, the record that stood for 11 years, the record that bigger, stronger, faster soldiers have been trying and failing to touch since before some of you were out of middle school. He turned back to Maya, and now there was no mistaking the challenge in his eyes. Tell you what, Chen, you run this course today, full combat load, and you beat my time, and I'll carry your ruck for the next week. Every road march, every movement, I'll carry it myself. A murmur rippled through the platoon. Drill sergeants didn't make offers like that. It was unheard of. But, Webb continued, if you don't beat my time, and let's be honest, you won't, you're going to stand in front of this platoon every morning for the rest of the cycle and tell them exactly why you thought you were special, why you thought the rules didn't apply to you, why you thought 5'0" of whatever you are could outperform soldiers who actually belong here. The words hung in the air like a sentence already pronounced. Maya felt the heat of them, felt the eyes of her fellow soldiers, felt the weight of a challenge designed not to be met, but to be a lesson. A public humiliation meant to remind everyone of their place in the hierarchy of physical capability. She should have been afraid. She should have been reconsidering her words, looking for a way to back down gracefully, to admit that she'd spoken out of turn. Instead, she felt something familiar settling into her bones. The cold, clear focus that had carried her through 1,000 early mornings in the pool, through the endless hours of training that had made her a nationally ranked swimmer before a shoulder injury ended that dream. The focus that had carried her through 4 years of ROTC, through the doubt and dismissal, through every moment when someone had looked at her and seen only what she wasn't. I understand, drill sergeant. Webb nodded slowly. Gear up, you run in 20 minutes. The obstacle course at Fort Benning was legendary, a quarter-mile of engineered suffering that tested every dimension of physical capability. Rope climbs and wall scales, low crawls through mud and sand, balance beams and monkey bars, cargo nets and tunnel crawls. It was designed to break soldiers down and show them what they were made of. Maya had studied it for weeks before. Arriving, she'd memorized every obstacle, every transition point, every place where seconds could be gained or lost. She'd analyzed videos of successful runs, noting techniques, timing, the small efficiencies that separated good times from great ones. But studying wasn't the same as doing, and doing it under the weight of full combat gear, 35 pounds of body armor, helmet, weapon, and ammunition, was a different proposition entirely. She stood at the starting line, feeling the familiar weight settle onto her shoulders. The other soldiers had formed a loose semicircle around the course, their morning training temporarily suspended to witness what everyone assumed would be a lesson in humility. Webb stood beside her, stopwatch ready. Last chance to reconsider, Chen. No shame in admitting you spoke too big. Maya looked at him, at the certainty in his eyes, at the absolute conviction that she would fail. She thought about all the people who had worn that same expression throughout her life. The coaches, the teachers, the well-meaning adults who had tried to steer her toward more realistic goals. She thought about her grandmother, who had come to America with nothing but determination and had built a restaurant empire through sheer force of will. The world will tell you what you cannot do, her grandmother had said. Your job is to do it anyway. I'm ready, drill sergeant. Webb shrugged. Your funeral, he raised his voice. Platoon, Private Chen is about to demonstrate why we don't let our mouths write checks our bodies can't cash. Watch and learn. He clicked the stopwatch. Go. Maya exploded off the line. The first obstacle was a 6-foot wall, and she hit it at full speed, using her momentum to carry her up and over in a single fluid motion. The technique was unconventional. Most soldiers her size would need to grab the top and muscle themselves over. But she'd spent months developing it, practicing on walls and barriers until the movement was as natural as breathing. The low crawl came next, 30 meters of mud and barbed wire, designed to force soldiers flat on their bellies. Most runners lost time here, struggling against the weight of their gear, the suction of the mud. Maya dropped and moved, not fighting the terrain, but flowing through it, using her small frame as the advantage it was in tight spaces. She could hear voices now, surprised exclamations, the murmur of soldiers realizing that something unexpected was happening. She blocked it out. The world narrowed to the next obstacle, the next movement, the next fraction of a second. The rope climb loomed ahead, 20 feet of braided hemp, the nemesis of countless soldiers who relied on arm strength alone. Maya jumped, grabbed, and began to climb, using the technique she'd perfected in months of training. Legs doing 80% of the work, arms guiding and stabilizing, core engaged to minimize wasted motion. She was over the top in 8 seconds. The platoon record was 12. The balance beam came next, then the monkey bars, then the cargo net. Each obstacle flowed into the next, each transition planned and practiced until it required no thought, only execution. Maya moved like water finding its path, never fighting the course, always adapting to it, using its structure rather than battling against it. Halfway through, she could feel the burn building in her muscles, the weight of the gear dragging at her shoulders. But she'd trained for this burn, had pushed through it so many times that it had become just another sensation to acknowledge and release. Pain was information, not instruction. It told her what her body was doing. It didn't tell her what to stop. The tunnel crawl swallowed her. 40 feet of corrugated metal pipe, dark and close, and designed to trigger every claustrophobic instinct a body possessed. She moved through it on muscle memory, shoulders scraping the sides, breath controlled and steady. She emerged into light and sprinted toward the final obstacles. The wall scale, the rope swing, the 30-meter dash to the finish line. Her legs were burning now, her lungs demanding more air than she could provide, but she could see the finish line, could see Webb standing there with the stopwatch, could see the expression on his face beginning to change. She hit the wall, grabbed the top, pulled herself over. The rope swing was a blur of motion. Grab, swing, release, land. And then she was running, really running, every remaining ounce of energy pouring into her legs as the finish line approached. She crossed it and collapsed forward, hands on her knees, chest heaving, the world swimming in and out of focus as her body screamed its protest. The silence around her was absolute. Then Webb's voice, strange and flat. 9 minutes, 38 seconds. Maya looked up, still gasping for breath. Webb was staring at the stopwatch like it had betrayed him personally, like the numbers displayed there were in a language he didn't recognize. 9:38, he repeated. That's... He stopped, seemed to recalculate something in his head, then looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. 4 seconds. She'd beaten his record by 4 seconds. The days that followed were different. Webb carried her ruck as promised. He did it without complaint, without commentary, shouldering the additional weight on every road march and movement for the full week. When other drill sergeants asked him about it, he just said, "A bet's a bet," and kept walking. But something else had shifted too. Something less visible, but more significant. The way Webb looked at her had changed. The assessment was still there, the evaluation that was simply part of who he was, but the assumption behind it had been replaced by something that might have been curiosity or respect, or both. Maya understood that she'd won more than a bet. She'd won a chance, the opportunity to be seen as something other than what her physical dimension suggested. In the currency of military culture, where respect was earned through demonstrated capability, she'd made a significant deposit, but she also understood that one victory didn't change the fundamental challenge she faced. She was still the smallest soldier in her platoon, still the one who had to work twice as hard to achieve the same results, still the one who would face skepticism with every new unit, every new mission, every new leader who looked at her and saw only what she wasn't. The obstacle course record was a beginning, not an ending. The real work was still ahead. On the 8th day, after Webb had returned to carrying only his own gear, he found her in the gym before dawn, working through a circuit training routine she'd designed herself. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her move from station to station, his expression unreadable. "Chen," she paused, coming to attention out of habit. "Drill sergeant." "At ease." He walked closer, his boots echoing in the empty gym. "How'd you do it?" "Do what, drill sergeant?" "Don't play games with me, Private. How'd you beat my time? I've watched bigger, stronger soldiers try for years. What's your secret?" Maya considered the question, considered all the possible answers, the deflections, the humble responses, the easy explanations that would satisfy curiosity without revealing too much. But Webb had carried her ruck for a week without complaint. He'd honored his word. He deserved honesty in return. "I studied the course for 6 months before I arrived," she said. "I analyzed video of every successful run I could find. I identified the obstacles where I could use my size as an advantage instead of a disadvantage, and then I trained specifically for those techniques until they were automatic." Webb was quiet for a moment. "You trained for 6 months, for a course you'd never actually seen." "Yes, drill sergeant." "Why?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Maya thought about her grandmother again, about the restaurant empire built on determination and dim sum. She thought about her parents, who'd never understood why their daughter wanted to join the army when she could have had a comfortable career in finance or medicine. She thought about the swimming career that had ended with a torn rotator cuff, and the long months of recovery when she'd had to rebuild not just her body, but her sense of who she was. "Because I knew people would doubt me," she said finally. "I knew they'd look at me and see someone who didn't belong. The only way to change that perception was to exceed it, not just meet the standard, but demolish it. Leave no room for doubt." Webb nodded slowly. "That's a hell of a lot of work, just to prove something to people who doubted you." "With respect, drill sergeant, it wasn't about proving something to them. It was about proving something to myself. The doubt from others is just noise. The doubt from yourself. That's the real enemy." Something flickered in Webb's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or the echo of a younger version of himself who had understood exactly what she meant. "You're going to make a good soldier, Chen," he said. "Maybe a great one, but being good isn't the same as being accepted. This world..." He paused, choosing his words. "This world is built on traditions and expectations. You're going to face resistance your whole career, not because of anything you do wrong, but because of what you represent. A challenge to the way things have always been. I know, drill sergeant. Do you?" His eyes were intent now, searching. "Do you know what it costs? The friendships you won't have, because people are intimidated by you. The promotions you'll have to fight for twice as hard. The moments when you'll wonder if it's worth it, when you'll think about walking away and finding an easier path." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I know what it costs. I've been paying it my whole life." Webb was silent for a long moment. Then he did something she'd never seen him do before. He smiled. "Good," he said. "Then you might actually survive." The weeks that followed were a crucible. the intense, deliberate pressure of infantry training, designed to forge soldiers from raw material. Maya threw herself into every evolution, every exercise, every opportunity to demonstrate that her obstacle course performance wasn't a fluke, but a reflection of who she was. She qualified expert on the rifle range, drilling tight groups into targets at distances that made the range instructors nod in grudging approval. She excelled in land navigation, her meticulous preparation and attention to detail translating into consistent success in the dense Georgia forests. She performed beyond standard in every physical test, not because she was naturally stronger or faster than her peers, but because she refused to accept limitations that others might have considered reasonable. The other soldiers in her platoon began to change too. The initial skepticism had given way to something more complex, a mixture of respect and curiosity, occasionally tinged with the discomfort that comes when assumptions are challenged. Some of them sought her out, asking about her training methods, her approach to preparation. Others kept their distance, not hostile but uncertain, still processing what her success meant for their own understanding of capability. Private First Class. Marcus Williams was one of the former. A former college linebacker from Alabama, he was everything Maya wasn't. Tall, broad, built for the kind of physical dominance that military culture instinctively respected. He'd been one of the most skeptical voices in the platoon initially, not cruel but dismissive in the casual way of someone who'd never had to question physical assumptions. The obstacle course had changed that. He'd watched her run, had seen her move through obstacles with an efficiency that made his own brute force approach seem primitive by comparison. And unlike some of his peers, Williams had the intellectual honesty to acknowledge when his assumptions had been wrong. He found her one evening in the day room, studying terrain maps for the upcoming field exercise. "Chen, mind if I sit?" "Go ahead." Williams settled into the chair across from her, his massive frame making the furniture look undersized. "I wanted to say something about the first week when the drill sergeant was, when he was testing me, when we were all testing you." Williams met her eyes directly, no evasion. "I was one of the ones who figured you'd wash out. Not because of anything against you personally, but because, well, look at you, look at me. In my experience, size matters in this business." "It does matter," Maya said. "Just not always in the ways people think." Williams nodded. "That's what I'm starting to realize. The way you ran that course, it wasn't about overpowering the obstacles. It was about being smarter than them, using technique and planning instead of just strength." He paused. "Where'd you learn to think like that?" Maya set down her map, giving the question the attention it deserved. "I was a competitive swimmer for most of my life. You know what swimming teaches you? That the water doesn't care how strong you are. You can't muscle your way through it. You have to work with it. Find the techniques that let you move efficiently instead of fighting resistance." "And you applied that to the obstacle course?" "To everything. Strength matters, but efficiency matters more. If I try to compete with you on pure physical power, I lose every time. But if I compete on technique, on preparation, on finding the angles that maximize my advantages, then size becomes one factor among many instead of the only factor." Williams was quiet for a moment, processing. "You know what I think? I think we've all been training wrong. We've been treating physical tasks like they're just about building more muscle, adding more power. But you're showing there's another way." "There's always another way," Maya said. "The question is whether you're willing to find it." 2 weeks before graduation, the battalion commander announced a competition, the Iron Soldier Challenge. It would be a 3-day event testing every dimension of combat readiness: physical fitness, marksmanship, land navigation, tactical decision-making, and culminating in a 30-mile road march with full combat load. The prize was simple but significant. The winner would receive a letter of recommendation for any future assignment of their choosing, personally written by the battalion commander. In the competitive world of military advancement, such a letter could open doors that would otherwise remain closed. The competition was open to all trainees in the cycle, nearly 200 soldiers from multiple companies. Webb pulled Maya aside after the announcement. "You should enter," he said. "I was planning to, drill sergeant." Webb shook his head. "You don't understand. You should enter and you should win, not just compete. Win." Maya frowned. "Drill sergeant, some of those soldiers are Rangers qualified candidates. They've been training their whole lives for physical competitions. And you've been training your whole life to exceed expectations." Webb's voice was intense, urgent. "Listen to me, Chen. I've been in this army for 14 years. I know how it works. You're good, better than good. But good doesn't always translate into opportunity, not for people who don't fit the mold. That letter from the battalion commander? It could change the trajectory of your career. I know that, drill sergeant. Then you know what's at stake. He leaned closer. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. There are people in this battalion who don't want you to succeed, not because of anything you've done, but because of what your success represents, a challenge to the way things have always been done. If you win this competition, you make it harder for them to ignore you. You make it impossible for them to pretend you're just an anomaly. Maya felt the weight of his words, the significance of what he was offering. This wasn't just advice, it was advocacy. A drill sergeant who had spent weeks testing her limits was now actively coaching her toward success. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Webb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more reflective, the voice of a man sharing something he didn't share often. "Because I have 2 daughters," he said, 8 and 11, and every time they ask me if they can grow up to be soldiers like their daddy, I tell them they can be anything they want to be, but I know what they're going to face. The doubts, the assumptions, the people who will look at them and see only what they aren't." He met her eyes. "You winning this competition, it matters. Not just for you, for everyone who'll come after you, for my daughters." Maya understood then what she was fighting for. Not just her own career, not just her own validation, but something larger. Every barrier she broke, every assumption she challenged, every limit she exceeded, it all became a path that others could follow. "I'll do my best, drill sergeant." "No," Webb said. "You'll do better than that. You'll win." The Iron Soldier Challenge began on a Tuesday morning, the Georgia heat already oppressive before the sun fully cleared the horizon. 187 soldiers had entered. They stood in formation as the battalion commander outlined the rules and the scoring system. Maya had spent the previous 2 weeks in preparation that bordered on obsession. She'd analyzed every event, identified the techniques and strategies that would maximize her performance, and trained specifically for each challenge. She'd also studied her competition, the soldiers most likely to be serious contenders, and noted their strengths and weaknesses. The first day tested marksmanship and physical fitness. Maya shot expert, her scores in the top 5 overall. On the physical fitness test, she finished 12th, respectable for the overall competition, but she knew she'd need to make up ground in the events that followed. The second day was land navigation. They were dropped into the Georgia forest with a map, compass, and 8 grid coordinates defined. Most soldiers finished with 5 or 6 points. A few exceptional navigators found 7. Maya found all 8, and she was the first soldier back to the collection point. When the scores were tallied at the end of the second day, she was in 3rd place overall. Ahead of her were 2 soldiers from the Ranger candidate platoon, both of them tall, powerfully built, the physical archetypes of infantry excellence. If the competition came down to the final event, the 30-mile road march, they would have a significant advantage. That night, Maya sat in her barracks room and studied the road march route. 30 miles of Georgia terrain, to be completed with a 45-pound ruck, weapon, and full combat equipment. The fastest soldiers would finish in under 8 hours. The standard for completion was 12. She thought about what Webb had said, about his daughters, about the people who would come after her, about the weight of being first, of breaking paths through resistance that shouldn't have existed but did. She thought about her grandmother, who had built an empire from nothing. She thought about herself, the swimmer who had lost her dream and found a new one, and she began to plan. The road march began at 0400, the darkness still thick, the air cool with the promise of brutal heat to come. 163 soldiers had made it through the first 2 days. They set off in a staggered start based on their current standings, the leaders going first. Maya started 3rd, 90 seconds behind the 2 Ranger candidates. She could see their headlamps bobbing ahead of her in the darkness, their pace aggressive, confident. They were setting a tempo designed to break the competition early, to establish dominance through sheer physical power. She didn't try to match it. Instead, she settled into a pace she'd calculated carefully, one that she could sustain for the full distance, that would conserve enough energy for a final push, that accounted for the fact that power athletes often started fast and faded, while endurance athletes did the opposite. The miles unfolded beneath her boots. The darkness gave way to gray dawn, then to the punishing brightness of full Georgia sun. She passed soldiers who had started ahead of her, their initial enthusiasm having given way to the grinding reality of long-distance movement under load. At mile 15, the first checkpoint, she was still in 3rd place. The 2 leaders had extended their lead, were now almost 10 minutes ahead. The NCOs at the checkpoint looked at her with something like sympathy, the look you give someone who has fought well but cannot win. Maya drank water ate a protein bar, and kept moving. At mile 20, something changed. The pace of the leaders had begun to slow, not dramatically, not visibly, but measurably. The aggressive early tempo was exacting its price. Meanwhile, Maya's pace remained constant, the rhythm she'd established carrying her forward with mechanical efficiency. She began to close the gap. At mile 25, she could see them ahead of her. 200 meters, 150, 100. They heard her footsteps and looked back, and she saw the surprise in their faces, the realization that the small soldier they'd dismissed was hunting them down. They tried to accelerate, to reassert their dominance, but their bodies wouldn't cooperate. They'd spent their reserves too early, and now they were paying the price. Maya drew even with them at mile 27. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge them, didn't waste energy on anything but the road ahead. She simply moved past, her pace unchanged, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. She crossed the finish line at 7 hours and 42 minutes, the first soldier to complete the course, the first female soldier to ever win the Iron Soldier Challenge. Behind her, the 2 Ranger candidates finished 8 minutes later, their faces carved with exhaustion and something that might have been disbelief. One by one, the other competitors crossed the line, many of them pausing to look at the small figure sitting in the shade, drinking water, her ruck still on her back because she hadn't yet had the energy to remove it. Webb was waiting for her. He didn't say anything at first, just handed her a canteen and sat down beside her. 7:42, he said finally, best time in the history of this competition. Maya nodded, still catching her breath. How much? 12 minutes faster than the old record. Webb shook his head slowly. 12 minutes. Chen, do you understand what you just did? She understood. She understood that she'd done more than win a race. She'd shattered an assumption, demolished a limitation, proven that capability could take forms that defied conventional measurement. She'd written her name into a record book in letters that couldn't be erased. But she also understood that this was still just a beginning. One competition, however historic, wouldn't change an institution built on centuries of tradition. The doubt wouldn't disappear. The challenges wouldn't end. Tomorrow and every day after, she would still be a small woman in a profession designed for large men, still fighting for respect that others received automatically. That was okay. That was the work. That was what it meant to be first. I understand, Drill Sergeant. Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a coin, worn smooth with years of handling. This was my father's, he said. He carried it through 2 tours in Vietnam. When he gave it to me, he said it was for someone who reminded him what courage looked like. He pressed it into her palm. He would have wanted you to have it. Maya looked at the coin, a simple bronze disc, its edges rounded by decades of touch. On one side was an eagle. On the other, words worn almost smooth, strength through honor. I can't accept this, Drill Sergeant. You can. You will. Webb's voice was firm but kind. Because someday, you're going to meet a soldier who reminds you what courage looks like, and you're going to pass it on. That's how it works. That's how we build something that lasts. Maya Chen graduated Infantry 1 Station Unit training at the top of her class, her name added to the honor roll that hung in the battalion headquarters. The battalion commander's letter of recommendation opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed, leading to assignments that accelerated her career in ways she'd only imagined. But more important than any official recognition was the unofficial legacy she left behind. The soldiers who'd trained alongside her carried stories of the small woman who'd beaten the obstacle course record, who'd won the Iron Soldier Challenge, who'd proven that excellence could wear any face. Those stories spread, as such stories do, passed from barracks to barracks, from one generation of soldiers to the next. They became part of the institutional memory, part of the accumulated wisdom about what was possible and who could achieve it. Years later, when Maya was a captain leading her own platoon, she received a letter from Webb. He'd retired by then, was working at a veterans organization, spending his days helping soldiers transition back to civilian life. Chen, my youngest daughter, graduated from ROTC last month. She commissioned as an infantry officer, one of the first in her program to do so. When I asked her what made her want to go infantry, she said she'd heard a story about a woman who'd beaten every record and earned every respect in a field where people said she didn't belong. She'd never met you, didn't even know your name. But your story reached her anyway. That's how it works. That's the legacy. I'm proud of the soldier you've become, but I'm more proud of the soldiers who will become because of you. Webb Maya read the letter 3 times, then added it to the collection she kept in a small wooden box. Medals and photographs and coins, the accumulated evidence of a career spent breaking barriers and building paths. She thought about Webb's daughter, about all the young soldiers who would follow her, about the long chain of courage that connected past to future. She thought about her grandmother, who had built an empire. She thought about herself, the swimmer who had lost one dream and found another. She thought about the drill sergeant who had mocked her physical ability, who had challenged her to prove him wrong, and who had become one of her greatest advocates when she did. That was the strange alchemy of respect, how it could be forged from doubt, how opposition could become support, how the people who tested you hardest sometimes became the ones who championed you most fiercely. Webb hadn't made her success easy. He'd made it meaningful. The years continued to pass. Maya rose through the ranks, each promotion a small victory against the doubt that never fully disappeared. She commanded platoons and companies, led soldiers into situations where the margin between life and death was measured in seconds and inches. She made decisions that haunted her, and decisions that saved lives, and she carried both with equal weight. She never forgot what it felt like to stand at that obstacle course starting line, to feel the skepticism of 40 soldiers who'd already decided she would fail. She never forgot the moment she crossed the finish line of the Iron Soldier Challenge, the stunned silence that followed. She never forgot Webb's coin, which she still carried in her pocket on every mission, every deployment, every moment that mattered. And she never forgot to look for soldiers who reminded her what courage looked like. The ones who didn't fit the mold, who faced doubt with determination, who refused to accept that their differences were limitations. When she found them, she did what Webb had done for her. She challenged them. She tested them. She pushed them beyond what they thought they could achieve. And when they exceeded her expectations, as they often did, she became their advocate, their champion, their bridge to opportunities they might not have found on their own. That was the work. That was the legacy. Not just breaking barriers for yourself, but holding the door open for everyone who came after. On her last day in uniform, after 22 years of service, Maya stood at the edge of the same obstacle course where her story had really begun. The course had been updated over the years, some obstacles replaced, others modified, but the essential challenge remained the same: a test of physical capability, mental determination, and the will to keep moving when everything in you wanted to stop. Her time still stood as the record, 9 minutes and 38 seconds. No one had beaten it in over 2 decades. She pulled Webb's coin from her pocket and held it in her palm, feeling the worn bronze, reading the faded words, strength through honor. She thought about all the soldiers she'd trained, all the barriers she'd broken, all the doubts she'd faced and overcome. She thought about the ones who'd doubted her, and the ones who'd believed in her, and how sometimes those were the same people at different moments in the journey. She thought about the next generation of soldiers, the ones who would face their own doubts, their own challenges, their own moments of decision. They would need their own advocates, their own champions, their own people who believed in them when belief was hardest to find. Maya walked to the training headquarters and found the young sergeant major who ran the obstacle course program. She placed the coin in his hand. "This was given to me by a drill sergeant who believed in me before I believed in myself," she said. "Pass it on to someone who reminds you what courage looks like." The sergeant major looked at the coin, at the worn inscription, at the weight of history it carried. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I will." Maya nodded, turned, and walked away from the course for the last time. Behind her, the sun was setting over the Georgia hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Ahead of her, a new chapter waited. Civilian life, new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But the work would continue. The legacy would endure. Somewhere, in a briefing room or a training compound or a dusty outpost halfway around the world, a soldier was preparing to face doubt that shouldn't exist, but did. And somewhere in the chain of passed down courage, a coin or a story or a moment of belief would reach them at exactly the right time. That was how it worked. That was how change happened. Not in grand gestures or sweeping reforms, but in the small, daily choices to see potential instead of limitation, to challenge instead of dismiss, to believe in people before they fully believed in themselves. History doesn't remember the quiet acts of courage, but maybe it should. Maybe that's what stories are for, to remember the ones who stood when standing was hardest, who proved their worth not through words, but through the patient, relentless work of exceeding every expectation. She never called herself a hero, but every soldier who knew her still tells the story. Because courage like that doesn't fade. It's passed on,